Okay, so hopefully most of you are finishing up your final HTML5 projects, and now it's time to start our game design unit. For our first project, we're going to be doing what I like to call the labyrinth, which is actually adapted from an existing tutorial that's on the Unity website called the Rollerball. This will actually not be the Rollerball, but it's very similar at first. So for game lesson 1, I'm going to be showing you how to get a project set up and set up your game board and your player object, which is this sphere here, and we're going to set up a little bit of the navigation and motion controls. So let's start setting up our first project. We can go File and create a new scene, or if you're just barely opening Unity, you can select New Project. From this window, we can select 3D or 2D, and we want to use 3D for this one, and we'll call this one Labyrinth. Forgot how to spell it for a minute, had to Google it. It's Labyrinth. Like that. And from here, we'll use, you got to click this little icon here, and then we will go into your username and then into your My Documents folder. And what you want to do, I can just delete this from here and redo it so that I can show you how it's done. You go into My Documents, right click, make a new folder, call it Unity Projects, and then we click this and we select folder, and it goes right in there, and then we click Create Project. So now we have our project open and ready to go, and the first thing we want to do is save our scene. So I'm going to do that first. I'm going to say File, and I'm going to say Save Scene. And that opens up an Explorer window because we need to create a folder for our scene. So scenes get automatically saved into assets, which is a good thing. And I'm just going to create a new folder here, and I'm going to call it Scenes. And that is because games will have more than one scene. And then in that Scenes folder, I'm going to make sure that's selected. And I'm going to call this, let's go Main. And so that's our main scene here. And then I can save scene. And every time I close out of a project, I'm going to save scene first, and then I'm going to save project. And just to show you how the folder structure works, I'm going to close out of this, and I'll open an Explorer window. And in My Documents, if I go into that Unity Projects folder, I have my Labyrinth project file, and under Assets, I have Scenes, and this is my main Unity scene. And I'm going to drag that into the Scenes folder, and then from here, I have the scene file. Well, it has this Unity logo, and it just so happens I can double-click it, and it opens up my project. So it's just a simple double-click. So I can open any scene like that from now on, as long as I save it first. So before we get into building our game, let's learn a little bit how the software works. The most important part of our Unity engine is our scene view. This is where you're going to build everything. This is where you're going to construct all of your game structure. This is where you're going to build your scene and place things and set up your navigation. So in the spirit of that, let's learn how to add objects to the scene. We're going to go over here to our hierarchy window here, and there's a button called Create. And if I create, I can create all different kinds of things, but the most important ones are here in the 3D object menu. And these are all what are called primitive objects. So it's not anything complicated that we can build or modify. They're just simple objects like cubes, spheres, capsules, and cylinders. And that's because Unity is not actually a 3D content creator. It's simply just a game engine. So anything that's more complex, like a character or a building or a car or something like that that you'd find in your game, you're actually going to import that from somewhere else. And then Unity puts it together and turns it into a game and animates it and that kind of thing. But for now, we are going to add our first object, which is going to be a plane. And a plane is just a big flat square. It's just like what you would know as a plane in algebra. It's just a big flat surface, and in this case, in the rest of our game, eventually it's going to become our game board. So let's leave the plane where it is for right now. We're going to create one more object, which is going to be a 3D object again, and it's going to be a sphere. So if I click over here, you can see I've added a sphere. If I click on it, I get these axes. Same with the plane. If I click on that, I get these axes. And I'll show you what those do in a minute. But I'm going to click back on the sphere, and I'm going to show you a couple of different ways to move objects around. The first way is using these arrow keys. The Y is for the the green is for the Y axis, which moves up and down. Red is for the X axis, which will move left and right. And the Z axis handles depth. So forward and back is for the Z axis. And if you wanted to move just one of these at once, so if you only wanted to move on one axis at a time, you'd use the arrows. If you only wanted to, like say, move left to right, you would just click the X-axis arrow, and you can move only left to right. Now you might want to move with two axes, meaning you want to move around this ground plane here. You could click these little squares inside and they will help you move. So if I just wanted to move around on the X and the Z axis, so I'm moving around in sort of a flattened out circle, I can do that using this plane. And then if I wanted to only move along the Y and Z axes, I could grab this square here and move that way, and I can't really move forward and back. I can only move, or I can't really move left to right. I can only move forward and back or up and down. And then same thing, if I only wanted to stick with the X and Y axes, I can move with this square. So that's what the X, Y, and Z axes are for. So just think about it as the Y is up and down, X is left to right, and Z is forward to back, or depth. And to navigate my view, I just simply use my mouse. I can do a scroll on my mouse wheel to zoom in and out. So I zoom forward to zoom in, or I scroll forward to zoom in. I scroll backward to zoom out. Then I can left click and I can rotate my view from my own perspective. So it's just like if I were looking around, if I were standing in the scene looking around. The other way I can rotate my scene is if I hold Alt and right click and drag in the scene. I can actually rotate the view from the center of the view. So that's a distinct difference between the simple left click. Is when I left click and drag in the scene, I look around from my perspective. But if I hold Alt and I right click and drag around the scene, I'm actually rotating the scene itself from the center of my view. The other thing I can do is view things from an absolute left, right, or forward, back, and even underneath position. So if I wanted to view the scene from the absolute left, I could click on this X-axis here, and I could view it from the left going in. I could also click on the Y to sort of view it from the top down, and if I flipped around here, if I'm going Y, I could also view it from the right by clicking the opposite side of the X. And if I wanted to go from the bottom up, I could also click the opposite of the Y, and I can look at it from the bottom up, but I don't really want to do that. So I will now rotate my view back to kind of where I was before. I can also click on something and center my view on it by hitting F. So if I wanted to center on this sphere, I could just click F and my scene centers around the sphere. I could do the same thing with the plane. I could center in on the plane and click F. But I'll zoom that in a little bit. And one last way to navigate your view is you have the middle mouse wheel that scrolls in and out, but you can also press it in and it has an actual button in it, and you can move your view around like this, and that's called panning. So that's it for the basics of navigation and setting up your scene. On the next video, we're going to set up the sphere and the plane to act as our game board and our game object.